lives that is so frequently misread. Sorrow's army as a boundless force. So drop your burdens and your parcels of remorse. Every seed will one day just leave us. Use your time well, because it's love and so you love and
Hello, Songwriting Lessons Online. We're here to talk to you about ear training today. So do put your name in the chat and tell us where you're joining us from today. We have none other than Dylan Andrews coming on to talk to us about ear training. So Dylan is an ear training coach. He's got loads of great tips on ear training that you can implement straight away. This is of great interest to me personally, because I remember buying a book on ear training and I paid about, I don't know, £12 for it, £15. I get this 200-page download, which I then print, which I don't know, I have to buy 3 toner cartridges for. And then all it is 200 pages telling you what you can do when you've trained your ear and why it's useful. There was no actual, how do you go about it? I got so cross that I emailed the guy who'd written it, and he sent me this very pompous reply. He didn't give me a refund. However, I can now lay this ghost to rest, because Dylan Andrews of Ear Training for Guitar is going to come on and talk to us about ear training and give us some tips about how we can go about training our own ears. So Dylan, as well as being an ear training expert and coach, he is an incredible guitar player, musician and composer, and frequently goes in to do sessions and that situations where he won't know the song or the artist and he'll be told it needs to be like this, or he needs to get the material really quickly. So you've got to have a really good ear for that. And there'll be improvised solos and things of this kind. And he also has a guitar school in America. So, Dylan, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
Yes, it's great to be here. I'm doing great. I'm doing awesome.
Excellent. Now, tell me about your own experience with ear training, because were you somebody who always found it that you could just hear something and you could immediately know what the note was, you had perfect pitch, or you found it really easy to hear a melody and then perfectly replicate it or play over chord changes? Was that something that you always had a big facility for?
No, not at all. The learning guitar, composing, all these other things seem to come not as hard, but ear training was a very, very difficult subject for me. I didn't even realize until many years into playing that you could even train your ear. I thought it was just something you were born with, that you had or you didn't. And my ear was awful. It was so bad. I couldn't tell the difference between chords or notes or anything. It was actually the only class that I took in music school that I almost failed. So yeah, I did not have a good ear.
Well, I think it's really interesting that you should comment on that, because ear training is one of those sort of invisible musical skills that you wouldn't know it existed. If you were someone who'd self-taught, you certainly wouldn't know it existed. You just would be able to like hear something and eventually get slightly better at hearing things. But there wouldn't be anyone to tell you this is a skill area, and if you work on it, your ability to do all the musical things will be improved. And I think even like I had piano lessons at school, and we had to do exams, and then I had guitar lessons and we had to do exams for that. And there was a little bit of oral training in the exam where you had to answer some questions on something that you heard. But the only way we prepared for that part of the exam was by literally them just giving us some of the practice exercises. And then you could either do that or you couldn't do it. There was no sense that perhaps there might be something you could do to prepare yourself, or if you weren't able to do it, it was like, well, what do I do now? There wasn't any sense that this was a skill that you could develop. And equally, there's a somewhat of an age gap between us, and you probably had the internet from a quite young age.
Kind of, yes.
But I didn't. So when I was a teenager and I was playing guitar, there was no internet. So if you wanted to be able to play something, you had to go to the guitar shop, the one music shop in the village, and buy the one book that they had, and then like try and figure it out. Or you had to be able to figure it out by ear. There was no tabs and no internet, and it's kind of fantastic for people who are enthusiastic about music and want to learn now that you have all these resources. But it does mean that perhaps those skills don't get developed out of necessity either. And I think it's interesting that you found it was only at music college that you had some ear training classes, and even then it wasn't something that you found particularly easy or accessible. What benefits might training our ears confer upon us that I haven't already mentioned? So I've talked about making it easier to transcribe songs. Certainly if you're a musician and you've got to learn a lot of songs quickly, it's really cuts that process down, even with tabs. And some tabs are not always accurate, you might want to, so there's that. Then there might be, if Beethoven went deaf in his 20s. So if he didn't have a good ear, he wouldn't have known what he was writing down.
Right.
He only was able to keep composing because he sort of knew, he could imagine what he was hearing in his head. What other benefits for songwriters especially, but just all musicians generally, what benefits might they enjoy if they train their ears more?
Yeah, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that when you have a good ear, your ability to be creative gets way, way easier. The thing about creativity is that everybody really is creative. Whether you believe you're not a creative person or not, you really have the ability to be very creative. The reason that maybe you can't be creative is because there's a lot of limitations on your skills. And if you remove those limitations, then you're able to be more creative. And when you have a good ear, being able to take what you play in your head, being able to say, oh, well, maybe if I did this or that or move things around, becomes way, way more easier and way more fun. And two really big superpowers that ear training gives you is, like Deanna mentioned, you can take what you hear in your head and you can instantly put it on the fretboard. So when you have an idea, you can go ahead and play it right away. This is very good when it comes to songwriting and improvising. And the other thing too that's really useful is that you know what things are going to sound like before you play them. So if you're improvising a solo, just because you're playing a note within the key doesn't mean that it's actually going to sound great. So actually knowing what things are going to sound like before you play them, what type of chord progression or chords are going to sound like before you play them, will really allow you to be more creative, have more ideas, have more fun. And the big thing too is be more confident when you play. So confidence is key, knowing that this note or whatever I'm going to play is going to sound awesome, and knowing that for sure will make making music and playing music so much more fun.
Yes. Hang on a minute. Wait, come back. How do I make it go half and half? Okay. There. Well, so yes, I think that's so true. And I remember learning to improvise, and the kind of abject terror of not knowing what was going to come out, and not knowing what, and then hearing something sound bad and not knowing why. And that thing you say about, just most of us start out by having a scale, and we're told you can play these notes over these in this key and it's going to sound okay. And then we're never really sure why sometimes it does seem to work out okay, and sometimes it doesn't seem to work out okay. And sort of connected with that, I remember when I first started writing songs, every time I wrote a new song, it just felt like an adventure into the jungle of music. And every sound that I liked, or every song section, it just seemed like an isolated bit of music I had found in the wilderness. And I had no sense that there oh, look, these chords, they sound nice together. I had absolutely no conception that there were any kind of rules, or that there were any sort of consistent and predictable relationships. So I think the confidence bit of what you're saying is very important and helpful. And some people think that ear training is a very, like you said earlier, something you can either do or you can't do. But in your experience, is that true, or is it possible to train this?
It's very possible to train it. I'm the example of it because I had such a bad ear. And the big key, though, is there are a ton of people teaching ear training. And from my experience, the majority of the advice is not very good advice. The reason that I say that is because the standard way that they teach ear training online, in music school, or whatever, just didn't work. It was extremely slow. The majority of people that have really good ears is those people that have been playing for decades, and just over that long period of time, they've eventually memorized and developed a decent ear. And for me, I wanted it to happen to where I didn't have to wait decades. One of the biggest problems with ear training is when people go through ear training, they just spend all of their time listening to stuff, like listening to intervals. Is this a major second or a minor second? Is this a perfect fifth or a perfect fourth? And doing that and listening to stuff, obviously in ear training isn't bad, but if it's all you're doing, training your ear won't happen, or it'll either happen extremely slowly. You need to have exercises mixed with the transcribing. So they work hand in hand. When you're listening to stuff, really, it's not so much exercising your ear, it's testing your ear and showing you where you're strong and where you're weak. Then you look at the weak points and you use exercises to train them. But that's the big thing I found, is when you just listen to stuff over and over and over, especially if you just listen to intervals in isolation, they're not going to actually sound like that in real music anyway. Like a lot of people memorize that the perfect fifth sounds like Star Wars. Well, there's a big problem with that, because when you hear a perfect fifth in actual music, it's not going to sound like Star Wars unless it had the exact chord behind it, the exact same rhythm. So memorizing it in that way actually isn't nearly as useful as what most people think. So yeah, so training your ear, as long as you know exactly what to do, what exercise to use, is absolutely possible. It's actually extremely simple. It takes time, but it's very simple to do.
Well, if somebody comes to me with a doubt about whether they'd be able to do that, so for many years I've taught singing and guitar, and if I'm teaching, coaching somebody for singing, I will I might play them, and they're having trouble with a particular fragment of melody, I will play it to them, and then a common vocal exercise is to move that little melody up and down, so that your vocal cords get so that you sing it in a lot of different parts of the register. You get very used to how the intervals move. So and sometimes people are like, oh, how can you do that? And you know, I tell them they can learn how to do it too, but it strikes people as something that's very complex to the point of being almost magical. And so the bit you said there about people who've been working as musicians for many years getting to a point where they find it quite quick to do that, but they sort of don't know how they got there. Therefore it seems to other people kind of like a magical thing, because it happened over so long as a byproduct of all the other musical activity they were doing. And the other thing that I say to people who doubt their ability in this area is to ask them if they've ever been to a birthday party and sung happy birthday. And, you know, most people will have done that at some point in their life, and they didn't think it was magical that they could do that. And the only reason, because everyone starts singing, you know, 1, 2, 3, happy birthday, you know, you don't do a little set of vocal warm-ups. You don't have a piano player who pops up to play you the melody first so you can remember it. So the reason that we can, and we don't know which note it's going to start on, like somebody starts it and everybody joins in. So the reason that we're able to do that is that we've got an imagined version of happy birthday that plays in our head as soon as it starts, and we know what's coming next. And so that's why we're able to sing it. And it has nothing to do with how perfectly tunefully we're singing it, and that's why we're able to recognize it. That's why everyone knows what right. Up to a point, your ability to even recognize a song implies a certain level of ear training.
Yes.
Otherwise you wouldn't recognize, you wouldn't know how how to describe the sound that you were hearing. So and I'm also interested by what you say about the type of training that you had at music college. I had I think it was a sort of standard way of approaching ear training back in the day, where you learned intervals according to the beginnings of songs. So it'd be happy birthday, it'd be a second, and then Wild Shepherds will be a third, and then We Wish You will be a fourth. So we learned all those things, and then you have a test, you play the intervals, you have to figure out which one it is. And in a test where you've got a little bit of time to kind of match the intervals in your head, you can probably just about get away with doing it that. But I think it's very helpful to people to know what not to do as well as what to do. And your point with that is really that it doesn't work quickly enough for us to be able to use it effectively in comparison with other ways of training your ear. And also, we don't want to get shackled in our minds to the mood of the rest of that song, whether it's Star Wars or Twinkle Twinkle Star, or that's quite funny, they both have the word star in the title, despite being very different bits of music, or, you know, whatever it is. So would you start with intervals as an approach to ear training? Or would you start with something else?
No, I would absolutely start with intervals. I would start with scale degrees, very, very similar things. But that is your first step. Is the thing with developing an ear is you're not trying to get to the point where you listen to music and you go, oh, that's a G chord, that's an A flat chord, that's a B flat minor. That's not the goal, because in order to do that, you'd be developing something called perfect pitch, and perfect pitch would literally take like a lifetime or multiple lifetimes to really do. So what you're doing is you're developing something called relative pitch, where you're being able to identify the scale degrees or the chords that are within a key. So for instance, if I hear a melody, I'll hear, oh, that was a 1, 4, 5, 6, meaning that was the first note of the scale, the fourth note, the fifth note, and the sixth note. Or I would hear that was a 6 minor, 2 minor, 1, meaning the chord. So I hear a 2 minor, 6 minor, 1. So I'm hearing what is being played relative to the 1. So having a relative pitch is what the vast, vast majority of great musicians, all musicians have. There is a very, very small portion of the population that has perfect pitch. It's something that you're usually born with, but it is intensely rare. So the rest of us normal people develop relative pitch. And the first things you want to do is start memorizing the sounds of intervals. The first thing that is really good to do is to build reliability. So what I mean by that is being able to choose one scale degree and be able to identify that consistently. So what I recommend people do is to start with the fifth, memorizing the fifth scale degree. And you can do this. One of the best ways of doing this is by singing it. Singing is the best way to train your ear by far. It is an incredibly quick way to start developing your oral skills, because if you really know what something sounds like Deanna was saying with the happy birthday, you should be able to sing it, be able to create it. And by actually physically creating and singing the notes, it allows your brain to catch on to it quicker and memorize it. So singing is the best. But if you get to the point where you can reliably always hear the fifth, that'll give you a lot of really great clues to start transcribing other things. Like if you hear a perfect fourth being played, well, if you have the fifth memorized, then your ear will tell you that, oh, well, that's almost a fifth, but it's just a little bit lower. So it's probably a fourth. Or if it's a sixth, it's almost a fifth, but it's a little bit higher. It'll just get you a little bit closer to start being able to transcribe melodies. Then after that, being able to just sing different intervals, sing different scale degrees. So try to sing a 1 to a 2, try to sing a 1 to a 6, try to sing a 1 to a 7, do the minor key, do whatever. But singing these intervals is the best starting place. And going back to relating them to songs, the reason that I don't like this, and that I think it's taught really often, is when you're in music school and you're in that kind of setting, it is a really easy way to pass tests. But it's not a really useful way to use in actual music. I had conversations with my teachers at the school about this, and none of them relate songs to intervals when they're playing actual music. So when they told me that and I heard that, I was like, well, then I probably shouldn't really spend a lot of time on this either, except to try to get through the class. So relating songs to intervals in the absolute very beginning can be useful, but it's not very good long term. So I usually recommend people to not even use it at all. But yeah, I would definitely start with training your ear on intervals first and then go from there.
So I'm interested in what you say about starting with a fifth and then using that as like a little flag in the sand to kind of plot musical space as being above or below. Let's say somebody doesn't have a whole ton of theory yet. What do we mean? What's a simple way of sort of clarifying what intervals even are?
Yeah. So what I mean by scale degrees and intervals is taking a scale and singing the numbers as opposed to the notes. So let's say we're in the key of C. The key of C has notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B. But instead of singing C to D, C to E, or whatever, you would sing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So C is the first note of the scale, D is the second, E is the third, F is the fourth, and so on. So you would just be singing the numbers. And the reason why you want to sing the numbers is because the great thing is these numbers will sound and feel the exact same way no matter what key you're in. So a fifth in the key of C is going to feel the same as a fifth in the key of F, as the key of G, as the key of A. It doesn't matter. So by training your ear to hear in one key, you're really developing all the keys at once. And you do want to do it in different keys and stuff. But just starting, if you're not sure about a lot of theory or you don't understand that, just do the key of C, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And instead of singing those notes, just sing the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7.
So there's a common voice training exercise called 1, 2, 1, and it's just 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then it has a variation that's 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 3, 1, 1, 4, 1, 1, 5, 1. Would something like this help somebody with their ear if they were also calling out the names of the intervals like I just did?
100%. That's exactly how you should do it. That exercise will go a very, very long way. A lot of ear training exercises is just doing that, Deanna, but just with different variations. Singing them in different orders, singing them in different ways, but singing those scales is exactly what you'd want to do.
Interesting. One other thing, it might be helpful if there's anyone without a whole lot of musical background that's watching this, about the concept of intervals, is you could think of them also as units of musical distance. So just like 5 centimeters is a bigger distance than 1 centimeter, a fifth musically is a larger distance between two notes than a second. And wherever you, let's say, we've got a ruler that's 15 centimeters or something. Wherever you put that ruler, wherever you start with that ruler, it's still 15 centimeters. And it's the same with intervals. Wherever you start that fifth, it's still same units of musical distance.
Yes.
But sometimes the numbers can be a bit like, well, what does that mean? And right. You'll probably find, but most people are going to find it fairly natural, the major scale, because it's what our Western musical system is based on. Right. So including, like my father likes to draw a really massive distinction between the peak of what he calls refined civilization with classical composers versus the decadence of what he called of all modern music. He makes a few exceptions for the Beatles, but but so I like to tease him by telling him it's all the same stuff. But they, Mozart's using the major scale too. Yes. Not only, of course, but
a slightly different way. But yeah, we're all using the same stuff.
And so you probably, if somebody hasn't done this and they start it, you'll probably find that there's more of it kind of stashed away in your pattern recognizing part of your brain than you expect there to be. So and the other thing about this is that you don't have to be a good singer to do it. It doesn't have to sound great. No,
you don't. Deanna, you're a great singer, but I'm an awful singer. And I feel like for some reason, a lot of guitar players or whoever aren't great singers. And luckily to train your ear, you don't have to be a good singer. You have aesthetic singing and functional singing. Aesthetic singing is like people that are actually good at singing and pro singers and sound great. And then you have functional singing where you can just match pitches. So everybody can sing hit a note and then match that note. If you can't right away, you can with practice. So just being able to match it. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, I have to sing, I'm not a very good singer, I can't do this. It's not true. You absolutely can. I am totally horrible. And this is exactly how I trained my ear, and it works. So you can learn how to match pitches, and you do not need to be a great singer. Thank goodness.
Well, I think this is really interesting because I've had singing students before who they didn't have a lot of habit of listening to much music when they were younger. It was an interest that emerged later on in their life. And sometimes to begin with, they did find it hard to match pitch. But with enough repetitions, their brain was able to target those pitches quite effectively. And so one way I had of helping them develop better, accuracy with their pitch matching was that I had a little recording. There was just a sound. There was just a note, like it might be, I don't know, let's say a G. And then there would be a space. They would have to sing their G. Then they would hear it again. Then there'd be a space, and then they would hear it again. And so they would be playing this audio, and then they'd be recording themselves, because it can be quite hard to assess the accuracy while you're producing the sound. Yeah. And also, in terms that your brain's quite a target finding machine. So if you give it a few goes, it will get closer and closer to what it's kind of understanding that it's supposed to be doing. And also if you give it frequency of repeating those. And we would always find that when we did that if the first attempt to match the pitch was not super accurate, the new singer just got closer and closer. So if you're not sure how you would assess whether you're doing this accurately, then I would recommend simply recording yourself while you're doing it, because your ability to hear the accuracy while you're doing it, your brain is already trying to like figure out what the note is and how to produce it. So to add the extra mental burden of also assessing the accuracies quite a lot, you might not be able to tell very accurately. And if you give yourself a few repetitions of each note and then you also record it, you'll be able to listen back and assess for how closely you're matching the note and how much closer you're getting to it with each repetition. So that's just something that I found helpful to people when it comes to pitch matching in the past.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that's a great way to look at the progress too, is a lot of people just either see, are they hitting the note or are they not hitting the note? And if they're not hitting the note, they're wrong. If they're hitting the note, they're right. But if you record yourself and you see that through the weeks you're getting closer to the note, you see that progress. So as long as you see progress, you're on the right track. But doing that, hitting a note, trying to sing it, record yourself is the best way to get there.
I think also something which can help is a little bit more understanding about how the production of sound works physiologically when you're singing. So for every different pitch we produce, our vocal cords, they're a different length. So just like the guitar strings are at different levels of tension on the guitar,
Yeah.
when we put our finger on a fret, we're shortening the string. So our vocal cords vibrate at a certain frequency, just like a guitar string vibrates at a certain frequency to produce a note. And those vocal folds or vocal cords, they become thicker, and that's like a thicker guitar string to produce the lower pitches. And to sing the higher notes, they stretch out and they become thinner, just like the thinner guitar strings produce higher pitches. So that the aiming, the giving yourself several goes at a pitch is helping these chords, which have this infinitely adjustable flexibility, that it's helping to build the correct coordination, because every pitch is going to have a different specific coordination and length and contraction of vocal cords, and they're going to be different for everybody. So whatever anyone's natural speaking style is, for their vocal cords to adjust to produce a particular pitch will be a slightly different adjustment for everyone. So it's just like if you were learning a dance routine, you might need to practice the steps a few times before you knew which order you built up that coordination. It's exactly the same building up a coordination that's required for us to match pitch with our vocal cords. And I think sometimes understanding that it's just a physiological thing that might require us to practice it in the same way we have to practice our chord shapes can help take some of the sort of mystery out of well, either I can produce a note or I can't.
Yeah, that's I didn't know that. That's very cool. Yeah.
Isn't it? It stops it being, like a mysterious voodoo, which is either accessible or not accessible. Once you know that it's just like, imagine a little rubber band. The tighter you ping it, the more the more twangy it's going to be. Technical term there.
Yeah. Yes, I understand that term. That's great. Yeah, that's awesome.
So intervals, great place to start. Thank you for that. When it comes to other things that songwriters might want to do, they're normally going to have an expressive goal. So the song might be intended to create an experience of some kind for the listener. How does ear training, or how might ear training help us communicate a certain emotional register in our songwriting? How do we start to, how do we cultivate that aspect of training our ear to be able to identify the characteristics of a certain emotional ambience and then recreate that in our own songs? Or let's say I've got one chord that I'm starting from, and I know that I want a moody type of sound, or I want an intense sound, or I want a dramatic sound, or I want a relaxed sound, or I want a bright sound. Like, what are my options from an ear training point of view, apart from just experimenting with every single chord that I might know?
Yeah, so what a really highly developed ear is going to give you is it's going to show you how to express different emotions. This is true for songwriting, composing solos, composing anything. When you have a highly trained ear, you are not only just being able to identify stuff, you understand on a deeper level how things feel. So if you want something that is more mysterious or bold, to me, the 3 chord in a major key does that to a certain extent. So when you have a highly trained ear, you have memorized how the chords feel and sound, and how they feel in different combinations with each other to create different sounds or express different things that you want. So a way that you can do this is that I'd recommend doing this even at the beginning if you haven't trained your ear before, to start playing chord progressions and just writing down how you think they feel. Write a description of them. So a first good exercise to do is just start in a major key, and we could do this in the key of C. Doesn't matter what key you do it in, but you play the 1 chord. In this key, it's C. And then let's say you play a D minor. This would be the 2 chord. And then you listen to that, and then you write down, how does that 2 chord sound to you? Try to describe it. What emotions or what moods do you think that that sound is creating? And if you have trouble doing this, it's good just to have a list of emotions. You can just Google stuff or look up a big list and just go through the list and just see, well, what does this sound do? It doesn't do this, does this, oh, it does this. And you write it down. You do this for the 2 chord, the 3 chord, the 4 chord, and so on. Then you can do chord progressions. So play a common chord progression that you like. Remember, you've got to know the numbers though, because let's say you play in the key of C, a C, G, A minor, F. This is a 1, 5, 6, 4 progression. That's the 1st, 5th, 6th, and 4th chord in the key. Well, if I know the numbers and I write down the feelings that I think that describes, then the key doesn't matter. A 1, 5, 6, 4 is always going to sound and feel that way, no matter what key I'm in. And basically what you're doing is you're building up a long list of chord progressions and chords and attaching emotions and descriptions to them. So this is an exercise that you don't do once. You do it many, many times over the course of years. And it's not going to take years for you to get this down, but as your ear refines, you might change your opinions on things. And this is also why I can't just tell you that the 2 is this, the 3 is this, the 4 is this, because it's all opinion based. It's something that I feel like it sounds in a certain way. You might completely disagree with and think it's something completely different. And that's okay, because you are figuring out what things sound like to you. So like Deanna was saying, is if you want a particular sound in your song or different particular type of feeling with a highly trained ear, you'd be like, oh, well, I know I can do this, 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 or this to create that sound. And it is limitless on different things that you can do, but starting with just playing each chord of the key and writing what emotions you feel like it's expressing off to the side. I even keep like an Excel sheet of this. I like Excel. Doing that's very, very helpful. And you can do this for minor chord progressions. You can do this for, well, if I keep the progression the same, but I change the key up a whole step, what kind of feeling does that give me? And you can just do this over time. When you're learning a song and you really like the feeling of that song, learn the chords and then write those chords down, explain the description and the feeling, and start understanding why you like it that much. And then now you've got another thing to add to your arsenal. But over time, you just start building up a huge catalog of different chord progressions and feelings, and you'll be able to way more accurately express yourself, as opposed to just thinking, oh, I want my song to sound like this, and randomly trying to do a bunch of different chords until you find something. In the beginning, this is okay because that's all you've got, but that's a really huge time suck. By training your ear and having all of this memorized, it will save you a lot of time and get you to finish a song much quicker, and more than likely it'll be a lot better than you would have if you didn't have a good ear.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting advice. And it's not, again, not something that one would think to do. Like, I certainly can't
Yeah, not at all.
had the idea to do that by myself. And I do remember that starting out with songwriting, it was quite exciting trying to find the next chord. Like, there was a certain enjoyment to that. But it in the end, since you're not rediscovering the wheel, because the things that you're going to decide sound good are going to be based, your tastes are already formed to a certain point by the time you start writing music, by everything you've heard in your life up to that point. So it's quite unlikely that exploring freeform is going to mean that you make different choices than you would if you simply knew what things were called. And sometimes people can feel a bit like once you label things, it's somehow less creative, or you're being less inspired, or it's less artistic, or something like this. And to those people, I would say it's more, and Dylan, you've probably got your own ideas as well of when this comes up, but it's more like when you are going to order some food in a restaurant, you've never eaten that pizza before, because we cannot have our pizza and eat it. But you've eaten enough other pizzas to have a fair predictive idea in your mind of what that flavor combination is going to taste like. And I think this is comparable to musical flavors and musical relationships. So you're not, you don't have to, if you order a cheese and tomato sandwich, you would be surprised if it tasted like vanilla. You'd probably spit it out, even if you like vanilla, because that's not what you're expecting.
Yeah.
And it's jarring. So the reason that you have chosen that sandwich instead of a different one is because you've got like a bank in your mind already, like your spreadsheet, of what cheese and tomato taste like. We know that the fruitiness of the tomato is good with the tanginess of the cheese. But we know that the tanginess of the cheese would be like weird with sugar.
Yeah.
So I love that. But it depends what you're used to. But yeah, because I'm not used to that, I would find that weird and I would not like it. Whereas, nice bit of cinnamon sugar on a pancake, that would be all good.
Mm-hmm.
So you could think about learning to recognize all of these different combinations as sort of analogous to food flavors.
Yes.
Because and I think this is also interesting because it speaks a little bit to what our style is going to be as songwriters. And when I was first starting to write songs and playing bands, people placed this huge premium on the notion of being original, even though none of us really knew enough about music to actually know what we were talking about.
Yeah.
So if you'd asked us to define original, I don't know what we would have done. Original within the narrow confines of 2005 London garage art rock. But anyway, oh, how original! There's a little staccato picking guitar lead line halfway through the. That's never
been done before.
Exactly. So anyway, but we now completely lost my train of thought by thinking about 2004-5 art rock. So we're saying flavors, yes. So you're not. It's the way that you'll combine them. You combine things where your creativity resides. You can only, if you use up all your time trying to identify a particular combination that you could have identified much quicker, you've got less time to make other creative decisions. And also when it comes to the notion of originality, just because you've eaten spaghetti bolognese before doesn't mean you never want to eat it again.
Mm-hmm.
So when people criticize artists for being very middle of the road or the same old thing or same four chords or whatever, of course you can have a desire to hear something different, and maybe you're going to be the person that's going to write that something different. But if what you write conforms musically to a certain genre or operates within a certain set of musical conventions, that doesn't make it bad. Let's say it's using a chord progression that we might have heard a lot of times before. There's still going to be your melodic choices, what the lyric's going to say, how you're going to arrange it. And the fact is, we all want to eat more pizza. So there's nothing wrong with writing some pizza songs. I don't mean songs about pizza. I just mean using elements that are familiar to the listener. That doesn't, and I'm also not saying that we should not take any trouble to make something our own or to develop our own style, or that we should just do things in a throwaway fashion. I'm just saying that you can compare quite a lot of other things to food. So I think the labeling of different, seeking to arrive at your own definition and labeling of different musical combinations is very helpful. And another thing, for anyone who feels like, sure, they can imagine sitting down with their guitar and a pencil, playing two chords, and then having a good old think about that, would be very developmental, but they also think they're a bit too lazy to do that. I've got something for you guys. I got you, because I am you. So for you guys, make a list of your 10 favorite songs that you just love listening to, and then write down what emotions those songs make you feel. Because that's going to be a little bit quicker for you than going from one chord to another chord. And then you'll be able to analyze what those songs are doing to create that effect. Then when you want that effect, you can borrow from the same techniques and the same kinds of chord movements. I do not mean ripping off other people's songs. I just mean learning what makes them sound the way they do and using some of those same ingredients. And then you'll be so inspired by how cool that is, you'll be ready to commit the effort of the two chords and the thinking.
Yes, that's great. That's a great idea.
Cool. So what about when it comes to chord progressions in theory? Because we've been talking a little bit about the one chord, the two chord, and all of this. What theory basics do you think are sort of non-negotiable if we want to train our ear in a meaningful way?
So you really don't have to know a ton of music theory. You didn't have to go to music school and learn all the music theory or anything. It's really just the foundational stuff. If you understand intervals and you understand what chords are within a key, this will go an extremely long way, depending on the type of music you listen to. This may be the only things you need. You really just need to understand that and understand a major and minor key. If you have those things down, you'll be in a really, really good spot. The only thing I would say after that that really helps when you get to a higher level is understanding the modes of a major scale. Right? There's 7 different modes. Understanding those will help you. But at the very beginning, just knowing your intervals and knowing what chords are in a key, major and minor, you're good to go. That's going to really cover you for almost every song that you've ever heard. Almost every song is just either in a major or minor key, and that's it. And that's really all you need.
Cool. Now, it would be a bit of a rabbit hole if I were to say, what's an easy way to learn about the chords in a major scale and in a key?
Yeah.
But if you do have anything that's that could be quick pointers for people on that might be interesting. But I have another question on how we would hear those chord progressions, how we can train ourselves to identify those chord progressions. And you've sort of semi-answered this by saying to get used to how a 1 chord to a 2 chord sounds, a 1 chord to a 3 chord. So obviously, if you do that and you really get used to those sounds and you start describing how they sound and feel to you, you're giving them a name like salt or cheese. And then when you hear that,
Correct.
You're going to know what name how to describe it again. You'll recognize that quality. So, but is there any other way we can identify longer chord progressions within songs according to how they sound, or any other tips for people on hearing chord progressions?
Yeah, absolutely. So one very helpful thing is when you're trying to transcribe a song, to think of yourself kind of like a detective. Getting to the point where you can just listen to stuff and immediately know, oh, that's the 6, that's the 4, that's the 3. That takes a lot of time. And even still, you're not always going to be like, I know exactly what that is right away. So you want to look for clues. Let's say we're in a major key. Well, there's only 3 major chords and 3 minor chords. The 7th chord of a major key is diminished, and it is very often not used. So you really don't ever really have to worry about that, unless you listen to jazz or something. But in rock, blues, pop, the diminished chord is a much more rare chord. So you just focus on the first 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now the 1, 4, and 5 chord are major. The 2, 3, and 6 chord are minor. So if you can just identify the difference between major or minor, that's going to eliminate 50% of the options. So if you know that it's a major chord, well, then it's got to be a 1, 4, 5. And then you can ask yourself, I was like, well, do I feel like I could end the song on this chord? And if so, it's probably the 1, because that's the most resolute. That's what most songs end on. If it's the 4 chord, it'll have a sense of movement, but it won't necessarily want to go to the 1. The 4, generally speaking, wants to move to the 5. So if you hear a major chord, but it wants to move not necessarily back to the 1, that's probably a 4. And then the 5 chord has a really strong sense of wanting to go back to the 5. So if you hear a major chord and it has a strong pull back to the 1, then more than likely this is the 5. This is chord and scale degree tendencies. Like when you play a chord, where does it want to really go to? And then if you play a 2 minor, well, that's almost, it's only 2 frets from the 1, so it's very close to the 1. The 3 has that mysterious, bold feeling. And the 6 is like it's like a very common minor chord. The 6 is the most common minor chord that's being played. So the first step is to listen for, is it major or minor? And then once you've got that, you've eliminated half of them. And then think to yourself, does this chord feel like it wants to go somewhere? And that will help you get there. So you want to do this through deducting, the law of deducting. You want to figure out where things are going and just remove what you know it isn't. So if you don't know what it is, just remove what you know it isn't until you get to an educated guess. But that's something that helps a lot. And still to this day, I've been doing ear training a long time. Still to this day, I use this. It's not all the time where I listen to something and I know immediately what it is. So I have to do a little bit of this detective work, and it works the same for melodies. If you hear a certain note, you can think about, well, where does this want to go? When it comes into melodies, and I know I'm giving off a ton of information, so later on, when you guys want to just rewind and watch this again, you can. But when you hear certain scale degrees being played, certain intervals, they want to go certain places too. And it's very similar to the chords. A 2 usually wants to go back to the 1. The 3 wants to usually stay there. It's resolute, but it's not the 1. The 4 wants to go to the 3. The 6 wants to go to the 5. The 7 wants to go to the 1. So you can listen out for these things and listen to these tendencies and be like, well, where does this note feel like it wants to go? And it can give you a really big clue on what it is. So treating everything you hear like you're a detective really helps a lot.
And for anyone who's thinking, okay, sure, but this all sounds quite abstract, just count to 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7. I'm gonna stay there, but you really want me to go to 1.
Yep.
And so when Dylan talks about tendencies, because of all the music you've listened to in your life, that sets certain expectations. And statistically, it's like really interesting books where they've crunched all the loads, like thousands of melodies, and they've looked at statistically how probable it is for one note to go to the next note. Like given the note you're on now, what's the most statistically likely next note? Now, I'm not saying we have to write music like machines, but all of those things do set our expectations. So that's why we might expect to hear after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, why that sounds unresolved, and we might want to go. Our mind sort of wants to hear 1 before, otherwise it's going to be kind of unsatisfying. And when Dylan was talking about the chords, just to give another little example there, anyone who's if I do this, I've established a key center, and if I go to the 5 chord, the longer I stay on that, kind of the more tension builds up. I just want it to go like there, and then I'm like, ah. And if I'd gone here, that's less tense, but it still feels like it's still got to go somewhere. So once you start listening for things with that in mind, anything that may have sounded abstract while we described it without listening will make a lot more sense to you. And you'll see that this isn't, this isn't, what note was that? Kidding. This isn't something, you won't have to struggle to identify if you think something wants to go somewhere. You'll know if you think it wants to go somewhere or not. Like, because it can be quite hard to imagine whether you would know whether it felt like something wanted to go somewhere or not. But once you start doing this, you'll see that it's much more detectable than you might have thought. So this is cool. Now, melodies. You mentioned melodies. What might training our ear do for our ability to write better melodies? As songwriters, if you can write good melodies, like, you know, the crack of songs, a catchy melody, it's going to make people addicted to your song. And we would all love to be able to write amazing melodies. Any ear training angle on that?
Yeah, well, the benefit of it is that it allows you to be more creative and create stuff in your mind. So if you have a really good ear, you know exactly what every single interval is going to sound like. And you can also mess with rhythm as well, just all inside of your head, and just think of things. So you don't always have your guitar around. You're at work, you're going to bed, you're doing whatever. The guitar is not present. But if you were able to just create and think of melodies in your mind to a really high level, this would allow you to create a lot more melodies. It would allow you to be able to remember, because you know exactly what you're hearing. It's not just random notes. You know what scale degrees they are. And you'll be able to try more things out. So when you hear a melody in your mind, if you think to yourself, well, what if I did the 6 to the 5 there and then heard that? Like, what if I did a 6 to a 3 and heard that? What if I did this in 8s and then ended on a whole note and then heard that? You can start messing things around and being creative, all just from your brain. And then when you figure out what you want, when you're at your guitar again, you can start playing them. So being able to do this all inside of your head gives you a huge advantage. It allows you to practice songwriting more and come up with more stuff way more often. It's true for chord progressions too. But a way to practice this that you can do is to just write out a bunch of different melodies on a piece of paper and try to sing them. So let's say you're in the key of C again. We got C, D, E, F, G, A, B. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, write a list of 10 3-note melodies in numbers. So maybe your first melody goes 1, 2, 3. The next melody goes 1, 2, 4. The next melody goes 1, 5, 6, and so on. And then you just try to sing them. And then use your guitar or whatever instrument you're playing to make sure you're singing them correctly. But you just try to sing them and you go down the list. Then you make a list of 4-note progressions, and then you do the same. If you know how to change keys, then change the key. 5-note melodies, 6-note melodies. Then start messing with the rhythm. Well, let's go back to the 3-note melodies, but let's sing in eighths and then end on a quarter. Or let's sing in eighths and then end on a half note and then add another eighth. I don't know, but you can start messing around with things. And this is a really great way to train your ear to get to the point where you can hear melodies in your mind and start creating them.
I think this is super great advice because most songwriters I've ever met have got pretty busy lives and they do not have like a whole weekend where they can think about, they can try different stuff out to finish this particular song. Most people are in a situation where they've got perhaps little pockets of time that they can use. Maybe they've got 20 minutes here, half an hour there. And if you can do some of the pre-thinking at another time, maybe when you're on public transport or you're waiting for something or in a queue, if you can be knowing what musical choices are available to you and starting to think some of them out, that means that when you do have your time for songwriting, you can complete more things. And there's another aspect to it, which is if you choose a melody that's your favorite out of 12 possibilities, you've made a decision at a higher level of detail than if you just sat down and it was the first thing that matched the chords.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, there's a lot of debate about how we might define creativity. But for me, one aspect of it is the quality of the decision making. So really any creative act is going to involve making a number of decisions in whatever medium you're in. And that might be sort of an obvious point to make. But when it comes to songwriting, the more writing a melody or writing chord progression, the more you're choosing between multiple possibilities, the more high level your decision making is going to be. Like the best out of 20 is likely to be better than the very first thing that you came up with. Yeah. Even if you come up with 20 things and you pick the first one, you are now confident that that first one is the best possible match for that particular part of that particular song. And that carries through to your confidence when you share the work. And it does snap to me, if you just like stuffed a line in that you didn't feel as good about as the rest of the song, or a little section or whatever, every time you play that live, your energy kind of sags in that bit. So this advice about, and the payoff of having trained your ear and being able to do this stuff at whatever level, even if you have to like think it out a little bit and count it out in your head, like 1, 5, 6, 5, even if you're not doing it to a massively high level, whatever level you're doing it at will be really, really helpful. So I love that advice. Now, to sum it up, we've talked about starting out with intervals from a scale. We've talked about listening for qualities of how chords combine. We haven't really talked about the difference between diatonic and non-diatonic chord progressions, but that might be for another time.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot to be getting on with there. And we've talked about writing out the different possible melodic choices on a piece of paper first, and then going through them in your mind and then on your instrument, and messing around with rhythm. These activities will also make you much better at finding notes and at singing or playing things accurately. What 3 to 5 activities would you suggest somebody might incorporate into their routine if they wanted to make a start? They want to do something they know is going to help them, but they don't want to overwhelm themselves.
Yeah, so if I had to give you just a few ear training things to start out on, the first thing that I would do is I would practice singing scales. This is a really good first thing to do, is just practice singing scales. So take a major scale, sing the major scale. Now you want to do this in this way. You want to play the 1, the root. So if you're in the key of C, you want to play the C, okay? So you hit a C note, and then you play it. Oh, let me see here. Hang on 1 second. Hey, Deanna, can you hear me okay? Hey, Deanna, your screen isn't showing up. Let me see. If you guys can, leave in the chat. Can you guys hear me okay? On my end, it's showing that my mic and everything's working fine.
Okay, I'm back.
You're back. Okay. All right, great. That didn't take long. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, wonderful.
Everyone could hear you in the time when I couldn't. Just went black. And it could because I was like, what 3 to 5 things are going to be really helpful for people? And then I went black and I couldn't hear you.
Okay.
And so if I would have been watching that back and then it's like,
Did that on purpose.
Right. So would you mind recapping for my benefit?
Yes. No, I didn't really get far into it anyway.
Okay.
So the 3 to 5 exercises that I would do is the first thing I would do is I would sing scales. So do major scales, minor scales, and there's the way that you want to do this is you're going to play the first note of the scale. So let's say we're in the key of C. You play a C. You sing the 1. You make sure it's matched. Then you sing the 2 without playing the 2 on the guitar. You sing the 2. Then you play the 2 after you've sung it to make sure you're right. Because if you play the 2 on the guitar and then you sing it, you're just matching pitches. And that will help you be able to match pitches, but it's not going to train your ear to identify the scale degrees. So then you sing a 3, you play the 3, the 4, you play the 4, and so on. So singing scales is great. Then I would do what I call is a point and sing method. You write out on a piece of paper numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you just point to a random one and you try to sing it. So you point to the 5, try to sing that. Point to the 2, try to sing that. Point to the 3, try to sing that. Whatever. It's just random, and you're trying to sing these different scale degrees in a random way. The other way that you can do this going more towards chord progressions is you can play a chord progression and then sing the roots. So if I'm going to play a 1, 5, 6, 4 progression, I'm going to play the 1 chord and I'll sing the 1. Then I'm going to sing the 5 before I play the 5 chord. After I sing it, then I play the chord and I make sure I'm right. Then I sing a 6, play that chord. It's basically doing the melodies, but instead of just singing the melodies, you're playing the chords with it, which is really helpful. Another really good exercise is to sing melodies. Like I said before, write down a bunch of different melodies using the numbers and try to sing those. It's an excellent exercise. These are very good things that will get you results quickly. The longer term one that I think is very important is to relate chords and chord progressions to emotions. So play a chord and try to describe how that chord sounds. You can also do this with scale degrees. How does the 2 sound to you? And different chord progressions. So if you write down, well, the 5 sounds to me like this, and it's just a 1 to a 5, well, that 5 might sound slightly differently if you have a 1, 5, 6, 4 progression. So write down a 1, 5, 6, 4 progression, and as a whole, write down, well, how does that progression as a whole make me feel? That is a longer term thing, but absolutely worth your time doing. It will improve your songwriting so much better. But I think those exercises alone, if you do those consistently, and that's the key, if you do those consistently, you will go a long way with your ear. You develop a pretty highly trained ear.
Well, thank you very much. I've just written them down in the chat. So for anyone who wants to copy that down and keep that, I would add to that if you find it hard to think of emotions and you're getting stuck on that part of it, another way to think about this is what is the quality of energy and movement. And this is something you touched on earlier, because if you think about things in terms of like, what amount of movement does that create for you? What feeling of movement or tension or energy does that have? That can be a slightly less, it can make it easier for us to not get stuck on, well, I don't know if this feels exactly happy or if this feels exactly, sometimes if we're trying to label something, we can get a bit stuck on how to label it. So to avoid that, but still get a sense, a recognizable identity in your own mind for how something sounds and feels, sometimes labeling it from point of view of energy and movement qualities can be helpful as an alternative. Now, that is not all, because Dylan also has a very cool free resource for us, and it's got a QR code, so you can either, I will stick the link in the comment, right, the caption for this video, but you can also just grab that QR code and it will take you to a resource. Dylan, can you tell us a bit about this resource?
Yeah, it's just a completely free video that I put together on the 5 easiest ear training exercises that I know of. Some of them I talked about, some of them I didn't. But that way, it's a pretty quick video that just lays out in more detail these exercises that you can do every day and exactly how to do them. And again, it's completely free. You can have it today and watch it and start going through your stuff and training your ear right away.
Cool. Thank you very much. I also have something for people. So this is an ebook on 5 ways to write great lyrics. It's all the things I wished I'd known when I started writing lyrics. Everything from how you can use language to literally create more of an experience in someone's brain. I don't think the scanners to detect this existed when I started out. But they do now. And how you can set up a little writing practice for yourself so that you're not dependent on random things happening in your life to generate inspiration, how you can structure the flow of information in your songs so that you don't like write everything at the top and then run out of steam at the end of verse 2. Anyone who's got into songwriting has probably had that happen to them at some point. It's got a lot of writing prompts in there. If you just did everything that's in this ebook and you did it consistently, you would know a lot more than I did when I released my first free album. So grab that there. It's also on a QR code. And then we have both of them here. So I'll leave that up in fact, I'll put that back up in a second. But I just want to say thank you very much to Dylan for coming on and giving us all these amazing tips. It's super interesting and it's super useful. And it's one of those things that can make people feel like they're not really musical, they're not really a musician, or they don't really have what it takes, or they don't belong in this club of people who know about music. And I think it can't be overstated how when you break these things down, it gives you full license to participate musically in a much deeper way, whether it's your playing, whether it's the sort of holy grail of playing what you hear in your head, which all of us would love to be able to do. And in a way, songwriting kind of is that. It's a combination of that with finding the sounds that are out there and sort of matching those two directions. So it's a really wonderful thing to do for yourself, to cultivate the skill in any level. And it's whatever, a little goes a long way. So you don't have to become an ear training ninja to benefit hugely from whatever skill you cultivate. So thanks very much for coming on and giving us some of those insights, especially given that they're developed in the field and they're not just regurgitations of what we learned in college, but they're all, as he pointed out, they're what's going to be useful to you in your actual musical activities, and it's all very well saying, well, we wish you Merry Christmas has got forth, but that point about how it's going to be useful is very significant. So thank you very much, and I look forward to checking out more of your content. You can follow Dylan on Instagram on Ear Training for Guitar, and he has a website with loads of resources that you should definitely go and check out. And I'm going to put his resource back out now. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for coming, Dylan, and train your ears, people.